Well, after the International Criminal Court on Friday issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin, charging him with war crimes in Ukraine, South Africa may find itself back in the spotlight. Now, according to the report, the crimes started in February 2022, the day after Russia dispatched soldiers to Ukraine. South Africa is required to detain suspects on its land because of its status as a signatory to the Rome Statute. But when faced with similar circumstances, the majority of African nations have opted to disregard the court. To unpack this developing story, we're joined by legal analyst Mpumeleo Zikalala. Mpumeleo, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us this morning. It would appear that South Africa finds itself in the middle of another awkward situation where we are soon going to be inviting a head of state that has a warrant of arrest issued against them by the ICC.
Definitely, and it's not going to be the first time in which the situation is taking place. But remember that I think it was 2017 or some 5 years ago with the former President al-Bashir. It was the same circumstances that played when it came to say you are a signatory to the statute, you are supposed to be obligated to then arrest and detain and then hand over to us any other individual that we so need as the ICC. If you fail to do that, there are consequences which are going to happen. But at least now we have a head start. By the time the conference comes in August, I think we'll have been able to detail all our compliance levels and to say this is what we are going to do as South Africans. Let's also remember that the courts have pronounced on this particular matter. This matter has gone to court quite a number of times, both stating that we are not allowed to withdraw from that particular statute after or before the internal rules and procedures have been done and dusted. Those being go to Parliament, get the majority of parliamentarians to agree to the withdrawal, and then only go and execute that particular withdrawal that we once attempted in 2017. Secondly, if we haven't withdrawn as yet and August 2023 hits and there's a BRICS summit which is going to take place and the Russian President is here, South Africa will be obligated to execute on that particular promise that they made on that particular treaty. So I think as you perfectly stated it, we are going for sort of a diplomatic nightmare that can be handled if we follow the right and correct procedures.
Indeed, but we know that referring to the Omar al-Bashir incident, South Africa actually failed to comply with the obligations that were placed upon it by the Rome Statute. The interesting thing is that there wasn't much of a, I suppose, there weren't many consequences that came out of that. And I wonder if that's going to create this impression that, you know, a similar result or outcome is likely to happen if indeed we don't get our house in order by the time it hits August.
We may face that particular situation, but also let's also remember that we now have opposition parties which are alert or woke to this type of instances taking place. So they're not going to sit and simply let things be. Even on the previous occasion with President Omar al-Bashir, it was a Democratic Alliance that went to court and said, we are part of this particular statute. As the president of the country and the government of the country must make sure that you're able to deal with them. When it comes to levels of compliance, yes, the ICC would tell you that you have a sovereign state, you are obligated to do whatever that you can in order to execute all those things. But they don't really follow up on those particular consequences as they haven't done so when it came to South Africa. I'm subject to correction, but I don't think there are any repercussions that took place or the matter seems to have died a natural death. We may see the same occurrence taking place, but now, taking into account the type of activeness which is being taken place by both opposition parties and other interested members of the international world, I don't think that it's going to receive the same attraction. I think attention is going to be drawn to it, and there are going to be a lot of people which are going to try and use the legal instruments that we have, for example, like the courts, to try and come back and say, make sure that you are able to enforce all the treaties that you are subject to. The only way in which this can be avoided is to then to say to President Putin, we apologize, Mr. Putin, you are not welcome to come to South Africa because we have an obligation, or to simply move the summit to a place or to a country where it is not subject to the treaty. And if we look at the number of countries that are there within the BRICS, I think it's only India and China which are not signatory to the Rome Statute. So they are the ones that would say, we can host you here. There's no obligation for us to arrest. But that would mean that South Africa is losing a very important opportunity for network, important opportunity to play within the international world, or international stage and be able to showcase what you can be able to do as South Africans.
Right. Well, our position, as you have elucidated for us, is quite clear when it comes to the Rome Statute. We are still signatories, and as such, the obligations still accrue. But we know that Russia withdrew from the Rome Statute in 2016, and I wonder if this wouldn't in any way create a loophole for South African authorities or for the current Ramaphosa administration to get out of upholding this particular issue of warrant of arrest.
Not necessarily, because what the statute says is, it says if you're a member state, you are simply have to execute on the number of arrests, that warrants that are there. Now, your job is to adjudicate on the innocence or guilt of the individuals, but you simply arrest, detain, and send over that person to us. So we will determine whether the person is innocent or not, and whether the person or the personage which we are going to arrest is part of the statute or not is neither here nor there. So from the side of the ICC, they would say, South Africa, you are part of the Roman Statute. Please make sure that you execute as per the legal and obligations that you have promised to us when you sign that particular treaty. If you fail to do so, there are going to be consequences that are going to follow. When the person is at the ICC and is being tried, the question of whether they are part of the statute or not, whether the crimes are there or not, or the accuracy of the crimes, or even whether they're going to be found innocent or guilty, is something which is a separate process altogether, which is why you find a number of litigants going to court and saying, we want South Africa to execute simply on the applications that have stated. We are not looking at the innocence or guilt of the individuals. We're simply saying, go and do the job as you promised to do it earlier.
Right. Well, Mpumelelo, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there for now. That's legal analyst Mpumeleo Zikalala helping us to unpack that warrant of arrest issued for Russian President Vladimir Putin and how it affects South Africa.